One thing I see that kind of annoys me is how many humans are there? How many species? Why is there only one species of human? Because you fucking defined it that way. A century ago, it was defined differently. And both of those definitions were scientific. So, like, you see shit like Bill Nye going around like, oh, race is, it's not scientific. Okay. Yeah, it is actually. That doesn't mean it's right, that doesn't mean it's real, and it certainly doesn't mean that you get to treat other people who don't look like you like fucking shit. But the whole idea of races, that actually does come from science. I'm sorry, but it does. What happened basically is you had the 60s were interesting. The 60s, oh my god. A lot of stuff happened in the 60s for social sciences. You get kind of the fame and popularity of figures like Noam Chomsky. Uh, you get, well, you get the civil rights movement, or as the white people call it, the summer of love. Right after the 60s, you get some white people from America discovering Australopithecines and basically being given all of the credit for it, even though the species was first described in, I think, the 40s, maybe even the 30s. It was quite a while before that, but because Piltdown Man was you know front and center in the scientific mind of how humans evolved, nobody gave a fuck. Oh, that's a chimpanzee. No, no, it wasn't. But we didn't want to be coming from black people, so Asians are kind of white. That's better. It's better to come from Asians. Well, and then World War II happened. And we're like, oh, maybe we don't want to come from Asians either. Africa's okay. Like, you can see the politics. You can see the politics when you actually go through and sift through all of what actually happened. You can see the oh my god, you can see the politics in science. And that's apart from the politics that's in science anyway. Like when Piltdown Man was discovered to be a hoax, which God, this story is fantastic. So the method by which Piltdown Man was dated and demonstrated to be a hoax was invented about 40 years before the presentation of Piltdown Man, but it wasn't used on Piltdown Man for another 40 years simply because that scientists didn't want it to not be real. But then when they finally did apply this dating method and they discovered, oh shit, now we have actual data saying it's not real. And this is, of course, data apart from multiple people looking at these remains and saying, hey, you know what? There's file marks here. This is an orangutan jaw. Apart from that evidence, we now have dating evidence that says, oh, well, this is only like 150 years old, not, you know, however fucking old they thought it should be, which was actually ridiculous anyway. Yeah, so when this was discovered, what happened is that the guy that kind of was like the biggest fan of Piltdown, the entire scientific community just threw him under the bus, and they're like, oh, we were never along for the ride in the first place. Like, fuck you guys. Are you fucking kidding me? And then you have, Neanderthal. And that drove for a very long time, for most of the 20th century, really, the view of where humans came from. Uh, which, God, when I look at a Neanderthal skull now, I can't even tell the difference. Like, I don't know. Is this modern human? Is this? I don't. I don't. I've looked at a lot of skulls. Like, I can't really tell the difference. I can in 3D like software take a modern human skull and a Neanderthal skull and like superimpose them, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I can kind of see the differences, but they're not important. They're not major things. Also, these guys interbred. Um, we know this. We know that as a white person, as a white hairy Sasquatch, I am part Neanderthal to some minuscule fucking degree. You know, probably 5, 6 times over at least, because interbreeding events occurred relatively often. We know this. Um, yeah, so you start running into problems because when you really look at it, we have, at the time that Neanderthal is first described, we have an environment within the scientific community that cares about this shit. So not the physicists, not Enrico Fermi. Um, we have an environment where they're happy to look at a black person and say, hey, he has a different species of human from me. They're happy to look at a Japanese person and say, that's a different species of human from me. This is the environment when Neanderthal was described as a different species of human. In that context, okay, I'm fine with that. They would have looked different. Does that make them, does that necessarily make their capabilities any different? No. No. They were probably basically exactly as intelligent as the other groups of people. They were probably just as capable at talking. And God, if you look at shit, yeah, I. I'm pretty sure they could talk just fine. Just fine. Well, and then you have other issues. So, God damn it. There's so many. So, kind of the argument that I'm going towards here is, well, maybe if we're considering all of the modern races to be one species, right? So you've got like Umbuti pygmies and, Australian Aboriginals and me and, you, all one species, and I'm totally fine with that. I'm all for that. Honestly, I think that's the argument that makes the most sense, and we should probably go with that. Also, it's going to have some social impact. Like, oh yeah, we're all the same. Oh yeah, this was an artifact of the '60s, right? Yeah, that's when shit started changing, the '60s, because we have the civil rights movement, and you start getting in people like Noam Chomsky. His theories on language, extremely political, extremely political. Um, like his position that you can learn about every language just by looking at your own. That is a reflex to this we're all the same movement, right? It's part of that. It's part of that. It's occurring at the same time from the same community. It's absolutely a part of that, and it is entangled with Bill Nye's science says there are no races. You can't actually like no, that's not. There's no evidence. That's not an evidence-based claim. That's an opinion. Not necessarily a bad opinion. Kind of a bad opinion in certain ways because, yeah. saying, yeah, you can't be a black person because there are no races. Well, that's gonna pose some problems because they're gonna experience a very different world than you. Fuck, fuck, you just kind of erased a lot of their issues. So yeah, race isn't real. Fuck you. We're all one species. Eh. I mean, I like. We'll go with that message, but science can't actually make that decision. Oh yeah. So for instance, something like 600,000, 800,000 years between like the LCA of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon. Okay, but they can still interbreed. They're having trouble infringing on each other's territories. They fill exactly the same ecological niche. Sounds like the same species to me. It's kind of like, when somebody's like, finds some researchers like, oh, hey, look at this little scorpion I found. It looks exactly like this other community, but these ones have been stuck in a cave for 500,000 years, and their eyes are 10% smaller. They're a different species. The reason you would go with this way, as a researcher, the only reason, because you know this argument is bullshit. You know it is actually the same exact species of scorpion. They can interbreed just fine. They have exactly the same capabilities, except the one is starting to adapt to the cave slightly. Other than that, they're exactly the same. The reason that you go for this is for money. Because you get to claim that you discovered a new species, you get to write papers describing it, right? You get credibility, you get paid, you get, like, this is going to make it easier for you to get grants in the future. This is money for you to describe this, claim this as a new species. So the same exact thing happens with ancient humans. Because they're dead, because they're gone, there isn't a community vouching for them right now. We get to very easily say, okay, because the 60s happened, we're all the same species now. But, let me show you what I have back here that I dug up in Africa. Because he's nobody's cousin. He's a different species. It's the same shit that was happening in the early 1900s and the 1800s, where anybody that looked slightly different was a different species of human. It's that same thing. We haven't made it any... We kind of made it worse, because now it's more dishonest. Like, before, it was just across the board, like, okay, you're black with curly hair, you're one species. You're white with straight hair, that's a different species. You speak Chinese, that's a different species. That's the way it used to be, and it used to be consistent. But what we have done is we have retained Neanderthal as a separate species under that same ideology that said Asians are a different species from white people. We've retained Neanderthal as a different species from us, from modern humans, and that allows us to go back and go, oh, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, Homo naledi, all of these things, just these slight little permutations. And God damn it, if you can get a 3D scan of these things and put them next to each other, or like superimpose them in the same space, the differences are ludicrously small. And in so many cases, the differences are actually smaller than what you can find in modern populations. So the argument that those species designations are legitimate, but today there's only one species of human, that's dishonest, because you're trying to have it both ways. I think the better argument would be, no, there's really only been one human species, and Homo habilis was not it. This not quite human. I don't think this counts yet. This is on the path, But the first one would be Homo erectus, around about 2 million years ago, and there's really only been one species since then. We have really good reasons to go with this because Homo habilis, their home range is basically identical to Australopithecus, Paranthropus, the home range of chimpanzees. It's in that same. You're stuck in a little corner of Africa. It's basically the same corner. You know, sitting around Lake Turkana, that region in Africa. All of these guys, they don't go very far from that. You know, maybe strike a little bit north, almost up to, you know, Sinai or something, but and maybe a little, but their home range is right around Lake Turkana. It's consistently. When Homo erectus gets onto the scene, bam. Well, one, they're bigger. They're modern human sizes. These little dudes, they're chimpanzee sizes. They're like half human sizes. They're like smaller than pygmy humans, right? So like Mbuti, you know, small modern humans would be bigger than these guys, than, you know, Homo erectus or Homo habilis. And Homo erectus, this dude is like 1.95 million years old. He's about my height. I'm about 6'2". He's somewhere in that ballpark, estimated. Yeah, he's a big dude. He's a lot bigger. He's a lot bigger than this guy. A lot bigger. And their range is all of Africa, Asia, and Europe, which is exactly the same range as modern humans, except that we managed to get to Australia and the Americas. Like, that's really, but like instantly, as soon as they're on the scene, they're everywhere they can walk to from Lake Turkana. Every piece of land that you can walk to from there, they're in within a few thousands of years, basically instantly. They fill the same ecological niche that we do, modern humans. They fill exactly the same ecological niche. Their jaw. So this is the original jaw. This is a modern jaw. It fits, like where the muscles go, where all of that stuff goes, fits perfectly. The only thing is, this guy has a mad overbite because he doesn't have 2 million years history of talking to force his jaw to retract a little bit and become lighter and easier and cost less energy for him to do that. But you know, the jaw is the same. The musculature in the jaw is the same. The cheek and chin display that prompts visual attention to the mouth, which goes back at least to Australopithecines. That's all there. Yeah, this one is interesting. So, dogs, right? Domestic dogs. Man's best friend. They're descended from wolves, yeah? Okay, that's fine. A couple times. Great, but where do wolves come from? Turns out, wolves arrive on the scene in Asia and Europe right after these guys do. This becomes very interesting because if we consider Homo erectus, Homo ergaster to be the same species as us, what this means is not only did we domesticate wolves into dogs, but we domesticated something like a fox into a wolf and then into dogs. Which is actually, that's a really interesting way to look at it because the time frame matches up really, really well. Wolves appear very shortly after these guys are on the scene in Europe and Asia. They never really appeared in Africa so much, which is interesting, right? Because we have other human ancestors in Africa, but wolves never appear there. As soon as human ancestors reach up into Asia and Europe and the Americas, wolves arrive. That indicates to me that there's very possibly something going on there, that the way they're interacting with their environment is causing wolves. It's causing some, and that's a fundamental behavior change in dogs, because basically all other dogs, they're skittish, smaller groups, like foxes and coyotes and jackals, like for the most part, they have a very similar behavior profile. And wolves are quite divergent. So the fact that wolves appear on the scene right after our very, very close ancestors at the very least, even if you want to consider this a different species from us, right after these guys arrive, wolves appear on the scene, and wolves happen to be the best canid for us to domesticate and turn into a pet. I think that's really, really interesting. And I think that actually speaks to something much deeper about what's going on here. But even later on, right, we have Homo ergaster, so still basically Homo erectus. It's just because it's in Asia, it got named something different. That same old pattern. Oh, well, it's slightly different, so it gets a new name. Yeah. I don't recall the time scale exactly, but I think something like 30,000 years ago. They're still present in Asia, and modern humans are unable, and then suddenly, boom, something happened, and they were able to get over there. Which means that for tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, you have these two populations, and they're not really neither is able to win over the other. Because they're the same exact species. They fill exactly the same niche. They have exactly the same capabilities. They're the same thing. Right, neither can take over the other's territory because they're the same thing. And this happened in Europe. We know this happened with Neanderthals and more modern-looking humans. We know this happened, and eventually Neanderthal lost. And we know in Asia, eventually Homo ergaster, or they just disappeared. We know this. But there was also this really prolonged time where they could not overlap in territory. And then you have regions like the Caucasus where the diversity of human species is absolutely insane for a very long period of time. Which, when I look at this, what I see is, well, duh, it's basically the Silk Road. This is the nexus of trade for this entire megacontinent of Afro-Eurasia. You're going to have, and assuming they don't have boats, they're not able to cross the Mediterranean, so they're going to have to walk around the Mediterranean, and they're going to have to walk from China and India over in order to trade with Africa, and they're going to be trading things because that's what people do. We know that, right, why are we able to walk? Why do we walk upright? So we can carry shit. Why do we want to carry shit? So that we can take something from its native spot to somewhere else where we can get more worth out of it. Well, if we're thinking that way, then we're thinking in terms of economics. And we're thinking that way at least as far back as Ardipithecus, which is like 8 million years ago or some shit. So by the time we get to Homo erectus, 2 million years ago, we have something like 7 or 8 million years of experience with economics. This is what we do. We trade shit. So the fact that you have all of this diversity in the Caucasus region, that's not actually that's not strange. You shouldn't be surprised by this. They're probably interbreeding. They're probably, whatever marriage sorts of things they might have had. I have no idea. Nobody does. But, they might have been doing things like that, pairing off. Um, who knows? But I think that there is a very good case to be made that there's really only ever been one human species, and it's 2 million years old. And the 200,000-year-old thing, that's based on the this very pushed back, you know, one, it's a problem because we know it doesn't represent what everybody looks like anyway. Two, it's a problem because we know that this version of looking at human species comes from intense racism. And we know it's a problem because we're trying to now not do that with modern populations, but it's totally fine to do it with historical ones. So that's hypocrisy. That is not objective. It is not scientific. Well, it is scientific because it's published. It's done by scientists and it's published. That makes it scientific. But it's not. It's not rigorous. See, God, it's not rigorous, right? You're applying one standard over here and a completely different standard over here, and saying it's all part of the same coherent whole. No, it isn't. No, it fucking isn't. There's one human species left today because you defined it that way. And we know for a fact that previous generations of scientists defined it differently. And they were like your great-grandparents. It was not that long ago. What the fuck? And we know why it changed. It changed because of the civil rights movement. We know this. If you want to claim anything else, you're full of shit. Because you can see it looking through history. When did the changes happen in the science? They always followed the social changes. We have a social change where we want to recognize everybody as being a human being and worth something. So what does science do? Science makes the same move, but it does it slightly later. It is a response. It is not the driver. It is reacting. We see it in linguistics with Noam Chomsky's views. We see it in anthropology. We see it in all of these social sciences consistently. They are responding to oppressed groups speaking out and saying, hey, fuck the man, let me live my life and not get fucking just killed by police for trying to bring groceries home to my family. Right, so before you cheer Bill Nye saying racism isn't scientific, you might want to think about where that's actually coming from. And as far as the basic message that's conveying, that yes, we are all equal. Yeah. Yeah. But we're not all equal because we're the same species. We're not all equal because we all like Marmite. It's not shit like that. We're all equal because we're here, because we're alive. Right? Fucking... This dude. This dude was a person. This dude was a person. You want to view them as different species? Okay. I think there's an argument to say that you don't have to. Probably shouldn't. But one way or the other, this was a human life. And it deserves respect.